Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and PTSD, otherwise known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, PTSD is a mental condition / disorder that people can get when it's following something traumatic or devastating in one's life. And some symptoms of this can include volatility, agitation, feeling alone and desolate, sleep difficulties, excessive worry, and even feeling delusional. And I'm going to talk about possible indicators in a chart for this. And I'm also going to be talking about transits which might give greater propensity for this, and also progressions as well that can give perhaps some greater propensity for PTSD. Now, the first thing, as far as a natal chart goes, well, one of the biggies, I think, is Pluto making an adverse aspect to the moon in the chart, and I do include it in conjunct. Some people don't think that's a major aspect. I see it as one. Some people think it is, some don't. And anyway, I'm talking about Pluto square, in conjunct, or opposition the moon in a natal chart. And this could be about emotional. Person might be more susceptible to emotional upheavals. And this could be also about transformation of emotions, and very often negative. And another thing is when also the Pluto making an adverse Saturn making an adverse aspect to the moon is also something that it could be a strong indicator for PTSD. And this could be really when you have the moon making an adverse aspect to Saturn, which is square, opposition, in conjunct. Well, that could also be something which could be something that could indicate perhaps a strong pessimistic thoughts and feelings, and could also indicate exceptional mistrust, and those things can be connected with PTSD. Now, another indicator in a natal chart could be the ruler of the 12th house strongly afflicted. And because the 12th house is associated with fears. And if you have that ruler afflicted, and I should say strongly afflicted, making a number of adverse aspects, then that could increase that tendency perhaps for PTSD as well. And also looking if Chiron makes an adverse aspect to your moon in your chart, this could indicate some very strong emotional wounds if you have Chiron making a square, in conjunct, or opposition to your natal moon. And another thing to look at in the chart too is just in general, if you have a strong preponderance of energy placements in mutable signs, because of the mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces have a greater inclination and proclivity toward fear, worry, and apprehension. And if they are afflicted, well, this could even exacerbate that tendency. And if you have, like, say, a mutable T-square or a mutable Grand Cross, and especially if you have the moon and then Pluto or Saturn in it, or all three, or any combination of that, then that could be something too. But generally, I would say the moon would, if you have the moon in it, and then if you have Saturn and or Pluto, I should say, and that would be that could indicate really a strong perhaps tendency toward perhaps some kind of anxiety or some kind of worry, fear, exasperation. You have all that mutable energy in it, making all those negative aspects. So also, even the sign Cancer, even though it's a cardinal sign, well, Cancer is a sign, okay, that could be one that could have a proclivity to lament over negative things. and really might have a tendency to cling to these things. And Cancer is a sign that can have a hard time letting go of the past, and really and can sometimes for good reminisce about good things, but Cancer can also reminisce about negative things. So if you have one or more strong Cancer placements, and when I say strong, I mean a personal planet or the ascendant, and it's afflicted, then this could also be a greater indicator for PTSD in one's life, and really, and that could be an indicator in a chart for a greater tendency toward this. So another thing too is when you have, like, say, even a dominant fixed chart. The thing about a dominant fixed chart, okay, could indicate that one may have a lot less inclination toward fear, worry, and apprehension. But at the same time, even somebody with a lot of dominant fixed energy in their chart, they're not necessarily impervious to post-traumatic stress disorder, because if you have, like, say, a fixed T-square or fixed Grand Cross, that could cause a lot of agitation and exasperation and a lot of tension, and that could be some strong indicators for PTSD. And it may not be as strong as, say, if you had a mutable Grand Cross or a mutable T-square, because those signs are more associated with fear, worry, and apprehension. But the mutable Grand Cross, the fixed Grand Cross and the fixed T-square, that could cause a lot of tension, and the fixed T-square could have a strong tendency to hang on to things and difficulty letting things go. And I believe the fixed Grand Cross as well, because that's even more intense, of course, than the fixed T-square. And also another thing to look at is if you have an afflicted Saturn. Now, I stated before that if you have Saturn making adverse aspect to your moon, that could be one indicator of a stronger possibility of PTSD. But if your Saturn is strongly afflicted, making a number of negative aspects to whatever in your chart, that could be another indicator for this, because Saturn could be a very strong harbinger of fear, worry, and apprehension. And really, if you have a Saturn strongly afflicted, well, that could be a very strong indicator of this. And really, the person could almost be a perpetual worrier if they have Saturn making a number of negative aspects, and especially if it's predominantly negative aspects in the chart, then that's what that could indicate. Now, another thing, though, is that when you can also look at transits to your chart as well. Firstly, I want to get to some before the transit. The one other thing I want to get at is that also, if you have a number of conjunctions in your natal chart, well, this could be another indicator of a stronger possibility of PTSD, because conjunctions can cause a lot of friction and tension. And the closer they are, the more intense they could be. If you have a lot of them, I would say if you have at least, say, 5, everybody's going to throw out a different number, but I would say at least 5 conjunctions in the chart, then you might be a little higher risk for this. And anyway, as far as transits go, let's say if you have transiting Saturn making an adverse aspect to your natal moon, this could bring some feelings of despondency, perhaps, and feeling disconsolate and seeing a lot of the negative aspects of things, being very pessimistic. I currently have transiting Saturn is making a fairly tight opposition to my natal moon, so I'm kind of understanding this in a way, those feelings, but I don't have PTSD, fortunately, as nothing devastating or traumatic has happened in recent time in my life. But if it were to happen around this time, I could be at greater susceptibility for it. Now, another thing too, of course, if you have transiting Pluto making an adverse aspect to your natal moon, this could be another thing as well, because during this time, I mean, it could indicate some kind of maybe negative transformation with the emotions. You might emotional upheavals may occur during this time for you, and if they do, then it could put you at maybe some greater susceptibility for the PTSD. Now, another thing too is let's say if you have transits to the 12th house, to your natal 12th house, and especially the malefic ones, and if they make adverse aspects, especially to your natal, some natal planets or points in your chart, and should say planets in your chart, then this could be a very strong indicator of PTSD possibly as well, or at least put you greater susceptibility toward it if you were to experience something traumatic in your life at that point in time. Now, let's say if you had Neptune transiting the 12th, that could indicate perhaps some delusional behavior. The 12th house is the house, it's solitude and seclusion, but it's also the house of mental illness. So if you have especially a malefic planet transiting that house, and it makes even just one, especially if it makes one adverse aspect to a natal point in your chart, then it could exacerbate that tendency toward perhaps PTSD. But like I stated before, this is only if you're experiencing something devastating or traumatic in your life at that point in time. And another thing too is, if let's say Saturn is transiting the 12th, that could give perhaps some strong despondency, depression even, and perhaps even in some extreme cases, maybe even paranoia, and those could be tied into PTSD as well. Now, if Pluto is transiting the 12th, well, this could be self-injurious type behavior, self-destructive. The 12th house is the house of your self-undoing, and and if you have, PTSD, one of the common symptoms, I believe, of that is self-destructive behavior. So if you have transiting Pluto hitting that 12th house, in your natal 12th house, and especially if it makes even if it just makes one adverse aspect to a natal point in your chart, well, that could exacerbate that tendency perhaps for that PTSD if you're experiencing that kind of situation in your life at that time. That could spur that on. Now, another thing, too, is that you want to look at progressions in your chart as well, and it's the same as I stated with the transits and the natal chart. With the progressions, if you have an adverse aspect maybe between the Moon and Pluto, or the Moon and Saturn, and what I didn't mention before was also Chiron could be a strong perpetrator or culprit of PTSD, and you want to look at that as well, not just in the progression. You could hit it if you have it hitting your 12th house. That could be negative. It could give some strong anxiety. I have natal Chiron in the 12th actually, and anyway, and if you have also, that does apply to the natal point in the chart. If you have Chiron afflicted, strongly afflicted, especially if you have it in the 12th house and it makes a number of adverse aspects, that could put you, I believe, at a higher risk for PTSD. And also, if you have it in your progressed chart, and let's say Chiron is making, your progressed Chiron is making a number of negative aspects to other progressed points in your chart, or if it's in the 12th house in your progressed chart, that can be something that could be negative as well as far as the PTSD indicator can go. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for astrology and PTSD. Stay tuned next time, where I'll be continuing my series on Mercury transiting the signs. Two things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone. Because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.